so caught up in that. I mean, there's like some ideas of old wealth, just people whose, family line goes back to, whenever the first ships came over and like that kind of thing. And just always, I never could understand what was going on with them. So.
Right. And they probably at the same time had a difficult time understanding you being able to trace your family, this Brahmin priesthood and guarding a temple. And
I remember that came up from time to time, but never. See, the thing is, for me also with a lot of that, I knew it to some extent, but I didn't know all the details of it. That's something that in my own research I've uncovered just doing interviews and things like that. So it's like growing up, I had a sense of my history, but I didn't know it, that depth, or that, all these legends and stories that were there. And that's been one of the most fascinating things that's come about since I because writing this book, I started it as just a piece about the recovery house. And then as I was writing that, I figured, I started to realize, oh my God, I've got to understand all these other parts of my life in order to really be able to flesh this out. And so then as I started to dig into that, that's when I started interviewing my dad, relatives, things like that, and uncovering all of these stories and this history. And I mean, it's, I'd heard bits and pieces, but then when you start hearing all the details and the ways in which people tell it, they tell these great mythic stories of just like, ancestors doing amazing things, fighting off the British, holding, punching, just being these amazing boxers, punching holes through stone, all this kind of stuff. They say with absolute sincerity, and they just believe it. And to have those kinds of stories just sprinkled throughout, it's just like, wow, that's a really cool legacy. It's a cool thing to be able to tap into.
And I loved that about the book. I loved that you had these stories of your family in India, and then at the same time you have a family member telling these great stories of mythic proportions with the Monkey King. And
I mean, that's one of the fun things for me, is that kind of Hinduism and Indian culture in general is just so interwoven with these mythologies, whether it be the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, all these, or there's even other just like regional folk tales and things like that. It's just interwoven throughout. And so to have that to draw on, just being of Indian descent, that's something I could mine for the rest of my life. But then the ways in which that intersects with my own kind of family's ideas of mythology, of the, what's happened specifically in our family line. And seeing the ways in which these stories become mythologized. There's these ways in which, like my father's abilities growing up, I can already see the ways in which they're being mythologized, because he had to be incredibly intelligent and just really focused in order to escape poverty, to pass all these exams and be consistently first in the state, first in every kind of test he took. And so, him experiencing it, if he talks about it, he's just like, yeah, I worked really hard. Other people who talk about it say, he just had this special ability. It's part of like this sense of this family line having just these amazing powers and abilities. And so it becomes, that experience for him is just an experienced life, but for them it's already becoming part of a mythology that traces back 1,000 years. So just witnessing that is a lot of fun too,
Yeah.
So.
One of the things that would make this memoir, makes it very interesting, but also brings into question what is a memoir, is some of your experiences actually encountering Hanuman and being able to speak with him and see him, and the way you present him as a very physical presence. And I loved just deciding, to me, as a reader, this doesn't have to matter whether this actually happened. It's more important to you or your character that this voice, this presence came to you in these moments and is a driving force in the story. And it was just so intriguing. And I loved having to just step away from that moment, because I'm someone who's very skeptical of mystical things, and so I loved it.
It's the question of memoir that keeps coming up, and like what I thought about in terms of this book was the best I could do is just try to present my life, the experience of it, as best as I could remember it. Now, there are so many areas that, especially, whether you're talking about digging into family history where it's based on stories and shoddy written record, or even my own history where it's based on what I can remember of conversations I had where I might misremember actually how the dialogue went, or I'm totally cracked out and just running around the street and I have no idea actually what happened in these 2 weeks except for what people told me I did. You know, I have to reconstruct that as a writer, and so the thing ultimately I can do is just try to be true to what that experience felt like and what I can remember. And so in terms of this idea of God interceding in my life, or, you know, these visions that I was having, you know, there's a lot going on inside of my head, but can I tell you that this is real or not real? You know, I don't know. And in that experience, in that moment, I couldn't tell you either. So I just present it as, you know, as it was happening to me. And people can come up with all kinds of different explanations for it. But that's ultimately outside the point. You know, I don't need to editorialize and say, you know, I kind of lost it for a while, or, you know, actually God came down and held my hand and led me out. I don't have to tell you which of these things it is. You experience it, you feel it, and you know, and you can make your own conclusions about that.
And I feel like that's how it was written too. You didn't suggest either of those options. It was just very matter of fact. That suddenly there he is.
I mean, it edges into that territory of faith, you know, because for me, I look at it as, personally, it's like, whatever it is, it saved my life, you know, and so, well, hell, I'm not going to question it, and I'm just going to allow that memory to be what it is, and just feel like I was touched in some way, and I don't know exactly, was that God? What was that? Was that my ancestors acting in some way? All these things my grandmother told me she could do, you know, so I don't know.
Well, another major theme of this book is the curse on your family. Can you explain the curse so people can understand what?
Yeah, the curse is, that's more of, there's a long kind of curse that I was talking about in terms of like the family leaving Kashmir and everything, and that's more of a constructed thing that I did narratively. But there's another idea of a curse that comes from my father abandoning the ancestral temple for not following in the priesthood, and that's more, you know, we were priests of Kali, who is this, actually it's a manifestation of Kali. It's not actually Kali herself, that Kali has different kinds of incarnations. But the thing about it is that for a goddess like that to abandon your duties to her and everything carries a weight, and it's supposed to carry some kind of punishment. And so that idea is something that I was writing about because, you know, my father had basically a lot of successes happen in his life, but it's also like there was this really spooky time where all of a sudden his dad, his grandfather, his grandmother, all of them just died like on the same day. There's these strange things that kept happening, and kind of, you know, people getting hit by cars, just people dying, people getting sick, all kinds of strange things that kept going on. And then there was just the story of our life in America and the difficulties he had, and then me as his youngest son and the one that he had the most hope for, just breaking his heart, you know, just completely taking all the potential and just, you know, just becoming actually a demon, you know, and just, you know, I tortured him. So there's things like that you know, that idea of a curse becomes really. I just remember my mom showing me all these astrology, these horoscope things, saying that all these planets were aligned against me in this point for these period of years, and it just, you know, all that stuff, when you're looking at all the crap that went on, it seems to all match up.
Oh yeah, it's interesting that you know, your father not following the family tradition of caring for the temple, and then you not following in his steps as a medical doctor. Yeah. And it was just kind of interesting because, you know, the times were calling him, the caste system and everything changing, and then he steps away, and then you come to America, your family comes to America, you were born in America, but and you did the same thing in some ways. You kind of said, no, I know there's expectations here. In some ways
it's something that he started, though. You know what I mean? Exactly. If you think about it, once you start breaking free of those lifelong traditions, you know, then for me, it just confronted with what America was and the possibility of it. You know, I was open to anything. Yeah. You know, so.
You know, at the same time, you're being educated here and everything, and then your parents are going home at night and they're saying, okay, you know, I loved this. I loved this about the